Here's what it would look like if additive were the solution. If what you're really telling me is you have a unit economic goal and you have workforce constraints, then what I would actually recommend is a hybrid solution where there's a digital inventory component that's a perfect use case for 3D printing. But in order to root cause the problem you're facing, you do not need a printer. You need a better supplier. I remember I was talking to you sweating it, thinking they're going to say, thank you so much for nothing and lose my number. But we got to the end and they said, oh my gosh, didn't even occur to me. I actually should pull in a whole nother technical sourcing team because you just opened my mind up to a possibility that might actually fix the problem that I've been facing for the past 20 years. Welcome to the Additive Advantage Podcast, the show where we cut through the hype and talk about what it really takes to turn innovation into real business results. I'm Dani Mason, and I'm joined by my co-host, Shon Anderson. Together, we bring decades of experience in technology and additive manufacturing to help you navigate transformation with clarity and confidence. Let's get into it. So one of the things I feel like we've been talking a lot about is what are the drivers behind technology transformation? How do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. Just the sentence itself, it sounds like it would be all about the technology. Mm-hmm. But when I talk to executives, and I was talking with an experienced CEO this morning in a different conversation, and increasingly the human element is where I will call them pitfalls. Don't always become failures, but certainly where you can get off track. But even when that has happened, the human element is so often overlooked.
I think that's very true. I think another thing that often gets overlooked is the business component as well. A lot of times it's a clear technical performance. I know I need to do change management and workforce integration, but did you pick the right problem? And what are the real implications to the business? And not just at your level, at the CEO's level or the CFO's level, at the customer's level. Do you find yourself running into that as well?
You know, it's funny, I do. And I think there's a phrase called vision leaks. That's just a leadership axiom. And where I would go with that is you have to beat the drum of can versus should all the time. And what I was really wanting the team to think about is, should we do that later? The same guy I was talking to this morning, aerospace executive, shared a story about, one of his direct reports brought up a technology initiative, multi-million-dollar initiative, and, of course, a list of outcomes or promises. And this guy's saying, in my mind, I'm already kind of discounting this list because I know not all this is going to happen. And unfortunately, we're in an industry that's known a lot more for hype than results. It's why we've got to, bring the people onto the show that we're talking about bringing and make that change and be the tip of that spear.
I think that's very, very salient. When we were talking to one of the folks that have been through this Additive Advantage model, we had to level set and say, yes, you wanted to see if additive would work, but what you hired us to do was fix a supply chain problem. And just going back to the first principles of what does that look like? Are you single sourced? Are you outsourcing? Do you have resiliency? Are you onshored? And getting back to the basics of what are we trying to solve and what looks good for the business, before your point, you go into how can additive solve this? Should we solve this via additive? And even more importantly, what is the actual root problem?
100%. And I'm going to turn that around on you because I'm guessing a lot of our viewers think that every time a customer hires us to come do an Additive Advantage project, you always tell them it can be done with additive. I know that's not the case.
That is absolutely not the case. I can think of several examples. One we went through, and it was this customer, they're in the molding space. And they have a high volume part that's completely outsourced. And so you're facing long lead times, high minimum order quantities, a ton of cash tied up in inventory. And on top of that, you can get variable quality with no control. And so as we were working through this process, we shared, here's what it would look like if additive were the solution. But if what you're really telling me is you have a unit economic goal and you have workforce constraints, then what I would actually recommend is a hybrid solution where there's a digital inventory component that's a perfect use case for 3D printing. But in order to root cause the problem you're facing, you do not need a printer. You need a better supplier. Let us help you go solve that. And we had that conversation, and I remember I was talking to you sweating it, thinking they're going to say thank you so much for nothing and lose my number. But we got to the end, and they said, oh my gosh, didn't even occur to me. I actually should pull in a whole nother technical sourcing team because you just opened my mind up to a possibility that might actually fix the problem that I've been facing for the past 20 years. So I share that with you. I share that with this audience. Back to that can versus should is so important when you're in this space.
But having a partner whose definition of success is not just selling you a machine to get the recurring revenue on resin is key. With the Additive Advantage model, it sounds like we're still working with this customer.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if additive can solve the problem, fantastic. But what we see with the global pressures around reshoring or nearshoring, the financial pressure that almost every industry is under, everybody I know in manufacturing, from med device to aerospace, you name it, the financial pressure is on. The bottom line has to improve, and you can't do it by just throwing money at the problem. How are you going to come to the right decision and the best decision that suits your company's strategy, but also the operating context? And that's where we've said for years, people don't want a part, they want a partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And some of that pressure is getting to know fast is as valuable as getting to yes. Another question that's been bubbling up that we keep hearing is, how do you know when an organization is ready for that kind of transformation? Keeping in mind now there's a people element, a business element, and a technology element.
This is the point at which I would say many organizations have started an advanced manufacturing initiative in the hole from the word go. If you look at, and obviously we're not using names, but I know you'll probably figure out who we're talking about here, but you have a customer that hasn't changed how they make or buy the part in 20 plus years. Now, what we want to do, because we read about 3D printing, is let's make this a whole different way. And I have none of the workforce capabilities inside my organization to do so. And now let's do something from scratch. And you put this immense burden on one or two people, usually an engineer and a production person, to go figure this out. When I hear a customer start with that explanation, I almost know from the get-go, not only is this not going to work, but I don't really want to get caught up in the middle of what it would take to help these people realize this isn't going to work. Having worked in a much larger company before, I would tell you that companies have frameworks for organizational change, transformation initiatives, et cetera. They almost never dust it off when they go to start this additive thing for some reason. But if you really took a cross-functional view of what are the outcomes we're driving for, who are the affected parties, who needs to be informed, et cetera, and build the team from there so that you have people whose win or definition of win aligns with what you're trying to produce in the business, and then resource them properly, which honestly is probably not more engineers. I haven't encountered too many companies wanting to do an additive project that didn't assign enough engineers. I've encountered a number of them that assigned too many engineers and no business people, no supply chain people early on, no quality representative. So there was not a plan, hey, we're going to make all these parts, but they all have to be 100% inspected to know that they're good. We just shot whatever hope you had of ROI in the head. So building a better cross-functional team from the get-go is absolutely key. And then having a partner who can communicate with everyone on that team. This aerospace executive that I was in a meeting with this morning, we had a good laugh. I didn't bring it up, he did, but about how, all these companies that want to help his aerospace company with manufacturing don't do their own manufacturing. Here again, understanding just the context of, you're going to add a new supplier. Is that going to blend in with the goods you get from your traditional supplier? Is this a different part number, same part number? How do you communicate to customers what's going on? Would they know the difference if they received one or the other? Would your customer support organization know if they got a call from a customer? Is it one that was made additively? Is it a traditional, is it molded? How would we know the difference? All these downstream implications, and that assumes you can make the part right.
Yeah, that's spot on. And it reminds me of another customer working with in the life sciences space where their charter, they have a ton of injection molding capabilities, have for half of a century. But the spark was, I need a better way to meet customer demand. They want to customize a part. I can't do that cost effectively or in the time I need to with molding. I should look at additive. And so all of a sudden your stakeholders are your business development teams, train to go identify a different customer problem? How does your CX team think about onboarding those and then translating it from what in our language we're calling engineering to production, where this additive initiative crosses those two functions as the customer's volume scales? And just having intentionality around the stakeholders in your business that don't even have the obvious production or engineering titles, but are critical if your initiative is going to go from internally greenlit to externally functional. Do you see that? What other surprises do you see in, I'm going to call it real world implementation of additive?
I would say one of the big ones is, and this is really to all the senior executives out there, I know that sometimes you explore implementation of advanced manufacturing because you're trying to build a strategic capability. I would encourage you to be more transparent with your teams that you're assigning to work on this, that guys, we're not going to pull a rabbit out of the hat here and magically all these parts are going to be perfect, but I need our product development team, production team, sourcing team working together. We have to figure out how to do this. Yet oftentimes what we see is we looked at this, we couldn't produce the part, so we're not doing anything. And when that bubbles back up to the senior executive level, they're saying, what do you mean we're not doing anything? We have to learn how to do this. And again, back to the human dynamic where you have traditionally engineers. I can pick on them because I am one, but we tend to define success as did we get the right answer or not? Well, if we can't solve the problem for this first part or maybe family of parts, whether it be a material limitation, production limitation, ROI, et cetera, well, we think the project failed. Well, did it fail or did we just get smarter about what to go apply it to? And if the goal is find a project that we can learn how to do this with, the team takes a much different approach than, hey, find a way to make this thing with 3D printing.
I think there's a lot of parallels between additive and what we're seeing with AI. We incorporate it, but it's top of mind for everyone. And I think the approach is very similar. Share some of your thoughts on how to think about AI, I'll call it, within this people, technology, business framework, and then maybe a little bit on how we're looking at applying it as a manufacturing company, internally and externally.
You know, you've all heard the phrase probably that you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you might be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI. The people who win with AI will be the people who can leverage and improve the human with the technology, not eliminate the human. But when you think about, how we do what we do, and we've just gotten done spending the last 10 minutes talking about human interactions, cross-functional interactions, et cetera, part of the additive advantage model leverages some AI tools to help the people running the process efficiently and effectively keep stakeholders aligned, document desired outcomes, and then measure at the end, how well is this project actually doing? Those are things that in the heat of battle of drawings and specs and metrology and all these other things that can get lost. And when the engineering work is done, leave the team disconnected from the original intent of the project. As a manufacturer ourselves, there are hundreds of ways we could use AI in the organization, but it's back to a can versus should question. And when we put together a team that honestly you led, that looked all across the business and sought input from leaders in each department about their low-hanging fruit of what's painful, what's time-consuming, what's low value, and how do we go eliminate those tasks if possible or automate, you can get real value. But it's not the technology itself, it's the technology plus the human.
Yeah, when you talk about remind people of the original intent, a lot of times those decisions and pathways aren't based on spec sheets. They're what are we trying to do? What do we think customers care about? And even leveraging AI not only for, I'll call it technical project management or efficiency of lower value tasks, but a lot of the relational work, especially when you think about someone, and I can pick on you because you're an engineer, even though I'm not, but you're very good with people. So how do I equip myself with a skill set that may not come naturally to me? What would you say if we dwell on the people side for a minute? Some of those key principles, whether it's how to do a constructive relationship or self-awareness, how to work with other people and lead from their needs, not manage from your own. I feel like so many nuggets you've equipped us with internally and equipped external teams with that have gone from let me help you develop this part to let me help you transform your business. Could you just dwell for a moment in the people and give some advice to all the folks listening around, here are the timeless principles you should implement, whether it's AI or AM?
For sure. So I'm about to turn loose of the biggest secret that every engineer knows and almost no one else knows. Almost every engineer struggles with having conversations with the financial executive in the decision-making chain. If you have access to AI and you know a little bit about this person, you can get help going into that conversation to set you up for success. It can be as simple as if your company uses any tools around personality type, if you know a little bit about yourself, you heard Dani talk about constructive relationship. We have a tool that we use at B9 Creations called the Pyramid of Constructive Relationships. The foundation of that is self-awareness. The next level is awareness of the person or people you're working with. The next level is modification of your own natural style to better meet the needs of the people you're working with, which results in that constructive relationship. Where it gets really powerful is when you get all parties seeking to do that for each other. You find that you don't have to move very far to gel. But if you have access to AI and you know that, the division vice president who's going to approve or not your project happens to be a certain personality type, happens to have a certain educational background, et cetera, you can create a scenario where you're saying, hey, I'm trying to convince this type of person of the merits of this type of project. What are 3 reasons why they might say no? How might I overcome those objections? Engineers don't need a lot of help to figure out the technical, not that they don't like calculators and things like that, but leveraging AI to help figure out the people piece. Now, what it won't do is it won't tell me if I have to pitch a project to Dani Mason, Dani wants you to say X, right? That is not authentic human interaction. What you're trying to figure out is, how does this person think? How do I think? And how might I overcome my natural bias, which might be highly technical, and I have 7 slides of microns and millimeters and metrology. And what Dani wants to know is, yeah, that's great. Can you put that on 1 slide? How much is it going to cost? And how much is it going to make us in the next 12 months? Because I have to roll this up as part of my earnings forecast. And if I'm not thinking about the things she would be thinking about, the odds that I'm going to bring her a project that is going to move her strategy forward are low.
Mm-hmm. I think that same tool can be used even interrelationally when you're not trying to helicopter up a level. I was just talking with a team, and there was, I'll call them a leader, and 2 engineers underneath. And one engineer is, I move fast, I break things, but I'm going to get to MVP. And the other engineer was, please cross all your T's and dot all your I's, or I'm going to have to go back and fix everything you broke. And sometimes you have to look at that and you have to say, how do I help them make sense of the context they're in? So it may not be translating into each other's language, but what stage of product are we in? Are we trying to figure out, can it work? Are we trying to figure out how usable is it? Are we just trying to get a demo so we can close a sale? And we're actually not signing up for delivering anything until a lead time. So I share that as an example of it is fantastic for helping go into the other person's world. But I also think it's fantastic for helping give a team context around where they are so they can best apply their strengths at the appropriate stage.
We've got it baked into the additive advantage model of assessing from a business, technology, and people standpoint, how capable and prepared are all the stakeholders that it will take to produce a successful project to take this on? And where are the potential red flags? Where might I need to do some more advanced communication or maybe request some more resource? Because currently, I may have a great project. It's going to be a home run financially, technically, et cetera. If my purchasing team is currently maxed, no capacity, and I call them with something that they don't really see how is clear to their KPIs, who are they going to put on it? The entry level guy that just came in out of, wherever they got him from. And that could have a significant negative impact on your entire initiative. If you don't go to the leader of that organization first and say, here's how this affects, your current KPIs, future KPIs, and frankly, our ability as a company to compete and win and connect around those shared things, those, again, it could be a simple people gap that undermines the success of the whole project. And thinking through that business technology people lens, not just at the front end, but all the way through, is one of the things that we've seen be a key to success, regardless of application or industry.
And I think that's a great transition point. We've talked a lot about the technology and a lot about the people, and maybe centering on the business for a little bit. A lot of these AM programs never hit the P&L, and it's things you're talking about where if I'm looking at cost per part with molding and cost per part with additive, it doesn't look like a good bet. But if I think about how much cash do I have tied up in inventory? What's my scrap rate? Because the traditional way has manual components to it. Or what downstream and upstream processes am I willing to horse trade in order to make this overall, with the total cost of ownership and implementation, viable and profitable? What advice or methods of thinking would you have for people listening about how do I help ensure that my AM pilot and my AM program is going to hit the P&L in a way that is successful?
I think you have to go all the way up to the, if it's 5-year strategic plan, 3-year, whatever cadence your business operates in, and look for elements of that plan that this initiative can connect to. At the end of the day, when resistance comes, and this is just how life and business work, resistance will come. If you're not getting any resistance, you may not be moving. But when resistance comes and people have to assess which of these programs are we going to continue, who's really going to get funded if we're going to have to make a 10% variable cost reduction, the ones that connect most to the strategy will be the ones that get funded. Everyone on the team needs to understand, how does what we're doing connect to the company strategy? Why is it important that we succeed? Not to sound cliche, but it's the difference between stacking bricks and building cathedrals. 2 people doing largely the same work. One of them thinks he's stacking bricks and spends his whole day grumbling about how hard the work is and goes home and is wondering what difference his work makes in the world. The other one knows he's building a cathedral. That impact that building is going to have on the people who will enter it is his spirits and gives him inspiration to keep going. And he goes home fulfilled and feeling that the work is fulfilling his purpose. Who's going to do better work? If we as leaders aren't helping our people understand, the difference between brick stacking and cathedral building, we're missing an opportunity.
Something that really struck me along those lines is we have a head here that runs our manufacturing and our quality. And we were talking about one of our suppliers. And I know this leader very well, and he does what you're talking about internally all the time. Let me help you understand what you're doing. You are building aerospace components that are directly tied to safety and innovation. What just hit me down flat was he said, do you know I do that with our external suppliers as well? Because if they don't feel the mission to the same extent my internal folks do, we're not aligned. And so kind of a tactical takeaway that I would share with people is that vision leaking can happen externally. And it's how you get higher quality. It's how you get incremental effort with people that are partnered with you that do not live inside the same four walls of you all the time. And I think that's so critical. A lot of times when you're external, I might go look at a earnings report or a strategy deck for a company, and I can start to see, okay, well, they have an initiative around 60% of their products must be newly entered into the market over the next 5 years, or they have a cost reduction strategy. But when you're internal, sometimes you can get a little insider baseball-y and you think, well, I know the priorities. But going back to your point and saying, do I understand them at that level? How can I be talking to my team around this is all about innovation and new products and sharing that with my external partners? Or we are in a cost and efficiency mode. We have to find a way to take out waste from this manufacturing process. Are there other practical, tactical takeaways you would give this audience so they can just go immediately apply some of the concepts you're talking about?
A couple of things come to mind. And one of them is we have a key customer that we're getting ready to have a conversation with actually this afternoon. They are under a lot of pressure to reduce costs, move faster, all of these things, which oftentimes conflict, right? Like, well, I can drive costs down, but then the 4-person team I used to use to launch these innovations is now a 2-person team. What I've found is all my years in business, the people who have the best odds of getting the results they want are the people who tell you what the results they want are. there's a belief system out there that if I tell you what I'm really after, well, now you're just going to package everything you do in a way that makes me think you're going to give it to me. And if, I always tell our teams, particularly on the technical side, like, refuse to shoot at a hidden target. If the customer will not tell you what the target is, do not expend our ammunition. It comes back to trust, right? And now we're back to the people part of this equation. And it's why we preach partnership versus parts. You can buy a machine that spits out parts from a lot of places. A partner that's going to help you solve the problem is a different thing altogether. If you're not comfortable telling the supplier, here's my strategic objective, and this is why this is so important, because you're nervous they're going to use that against you, you clearly don't have the right partner. You as a customer, what you should want is not only the technological horsepower of a partner, but they're smart people. We talk at B9 all the time about the value of doing business with us. And if a customer is wanting to keep the target hidden, a lot of the horsepower in our company is the intelligence and experience of our people. They can't bring that to bear if you won't tell them what the real problem is. And so I would just, I would go back to this foundational thing, and I would challenge executives to think through, is my default to learn as much as I can without actually telling them what I'm trying to do? Or do I clearly understand what I'm trying to accomplish? And for people that I've developed a certain level of relationship with, I'm willing to put my cards on the table because I need everything they can give me to accomplish that objective. That's where I would start. And again, if you find yourself like, well, I don't know if I really want to tell them that, you're probably talking to the wrong company.
I appreciate that. I listen to a lot of podcasts, you do too. And the worst thing is to leave with a bunch of platitudes and no practical implementation. And that's why I think these are very helpful takeaways. And I'll tell you, the same vulnerability you might feel as a customer laying your cards on the table with a supplier, you can feel that as a leader too. And it's just as important. Your job is not to have all the answers at any given time. Your job is to understand what is the right question that I need an answer to, and do I have the right team, and are they empowered and supported to go figure it out? And to your point, making that mindset shift just unlocks reams of capability that you would not otherwise have access to if you keep everything close to the vest out of a desire to be all-knowing.
Well, you're touching on another really important point, that it's a shift in how we have to think about the value that we bring as leaders or technical professionals or supply chain professionals or anything else. Sometimes we get trapped into the mindset of, I'm valuable because I found this answer. I promise you, what every CEO, every senior executive is looking for is somebody that can look at my list of strategic objectives and find a way to help us as an organization accomplish them. If you relied on 3 different external partners and you pulled together maybe what looked on the surface like an odd cross-functional internal team, but instead of in 12 months we accomplished one thing, you found a way to do 3. The fact that you didn't figure it out all by yourself, that's not a fault. That tells me you're ready for a promotion. Picking good partners that let you accomplish more things in less time with less resource, while doing the other key to this is you should be picking a partner where your need and what they're really good at align. You can have someone who's incredibly skilled at software integration. If this is largely a quality and a quality management system, supply chain project, the fact that they're good on the software side may not be enough to make sense. They may be a piece of the team, but they're probably not the quarterback of the team. Oftentimes we forget that.
And just in case you think this is just Shon and I drinking our own Kool-Aid, one of our guests that we have interviewed that will be released in a future podcast, technical guy leading a technical organization with a technical team. When I asked him, how do you think about speeding up your design iterations? He told me the fastest way to do that is communication. And my first prototype is a conversation. And so I can't think of a better way to stress this point home, that this is key to unlocking these additive initiatives that we're talking about.
Well, if I could build on that, and again, this is another customer and potentially a future story on this show. This is a small company driving some innovation in the medical space, small team. What they thought they wanted was a printer. You know the story I'm talking about? Share
Potentially, because most of mine start that way.
share a little bit about, so you have a guy who thought he wanted a printer. Turns out what he needed was a partner that could help him iterate and innovate, and how you saved him from himself.
Yes, I do know the story you're talking about. Um, this guy has a long background in the field that he is in and has successfully brought a lot of different companies to market. And because he is so skilled at the technical and business side, his assumption is I should do both in this new venture because it is my skill set. Can you just supply me with the right technology and set me loose? And what we started with was a conversation. I said, help me understand what is most critical for your business right now. Well, I have to get this product to market and I'm assembling a team and I have a lot of customer growth levers I need to unlock. I said, okay, where does 3D printing fit into that? And he goes, well, at night. And what you have to look yourself in the mirror and say is, what am I uniquely equipped to do that's going to add the most value right now? And can I find a partner to supplement that? So what we ended up doing is we have an ongoing agreement where we act like an outsourced R&D team. We're helping design products, produce products, ship products, all of the things he is perfectly equipped to do, but are not things only he can do with where his business is at. And it's been so successful that he asked to do it again in 2026. And I share that story because when you think about value and waste, and these are going to be terms you all are familiar with because you all come from a manufacturing background, sometimes that's not scrap. Sometimes that's my time and my focus and my resource and my prioritization. Because even if you were doing this at night, and even if you found enough hours in the day, how is that fracturing the most important thing you need to be working on? Distraction kills. And for him to work with us and come to that realization was incredibly rewarding because I shared this a little bit ago with Shon, where similar to a Kimberly-Clark, if you are all familiar with that brand, they produce a lot of things that you would know, the tissues of the world. What they don't do is go around and tout their own name. They are the company that makes the products you love better. And that is a very similar philosophy to what we have and what I personally believe every time we engage with a customer. That's why we launched this model, because we don't need our name out on everything. We need your name out on everything in a way only you can deliver.
Absolutely. Customers are your true north. You have to build an organization that revolves around them, and understanding one of the things that back to the value of doing business with B9, something you help this business leader understand is what was his most valuable resource and what could he entrust someone else to do. And particularly for these young companies where, the good news is they don't have tons and tons of resources to waste. The bad news is they don't have tons and tons of resources to waste. So we don't come up with the horror stories from them about, we both know of a company that had a dozen engineers on a project for 2 years and never got one part out the door that met spec. But the consequence for them is they got put on a different project. In startup companies, particularly med device or other technology companies, the consequence is your business goes away. So when customers trust us to help them succeed as a company, that's one of the greatest senses of responsibility that we feel.
Yeah. In fact, internally, we talk about our competitive advantage as out listening the competition. And that's very intentional. It's not out marketing, out selling, out R&Ding, out wowing. It's out listening. And that's how we have our true north tied to our customers. And I think that might be a nice way to segue into this additive advantage model. What it is, why we're doing it, the results we're seeing, and a sneak peek of how the guests will be bringing on this show really live out technology transformation in its truest sense. In the same people, technology, and business elements that we're talking about, they're all experts in. So I want to start with the model. Talk a little bit about how this urge and desire and DNA of our company to outlisten transformed what we do with customers into this new model.
Well, it goes to a desire to bring the most value we can bring for the customer. If you're really asking great questions of your customers on a regular basis, you start to get a feel for what the real problem is. And so part of this, as Dani's mentioning, was asking great questions to understand what the customer really needs. Part of this was a realization that, hey, we'll be a lot more successful if our customers are a lot more successful with this. So when we looked at the model or tried to develop a model, we said, what are the front end conversations, definitions, KPIs, inputs that have to be captured based on the desired outcomes. And then how do you track those, make visibility relatively simple, leverage tools so that you could do this with any team in any context, whether it's a large corporation that might have teams on 3 different continents, or whether this is a small corporation down the road. Building a model to take the guesswork out of moving from one phase to the other, out of communication between one team and the other, out of what are the things I need to consider before I ever talk about a piece of technology. Again, the goal is make some of those things simpler so that we can focus on the customer's specific context, business outcomes, and the people that actually work for them.
Yeah, I think one of the critical levers is, to your point, we always start with the business first. And I don't mean the business case of my CapEx request on my payback on equipment. I mean the business case of the problem you're trying to solve. And being really intentional around these stage gates where we start with feasibility. We do not start with printing anything, because we need to understand, based on where you're trying to go, is additive the right solution? And if so, what should that tech stack look like before moving into printing? Not selling you a piece of equipment. We need to pilot this out, because figuring out downstream, upstream implications, workforce, workflow, all of those elements need to come to life before you have that out in a plant. And then moving into this production phase and having restraint, I'll call it, in each of those stage gates, and making sure that at the end of each, we're going back to the business case that we set out to do and validating against it, has been transformative. It allows customers to de-risk what they're trying to do before they put, to your point, this customer we're both thinking of, before they put millions and tens of engineers on something for months to years. It's like, how can I get to yes or no quickly? And then how can I de-risk at a small pilot level before I go into production? And it has really changed the game. To your point, we've had findings like this other customer that said, maybe I should never print this myself. Maybe that's not ever the competitive advantage that I deliver. Maybe I should lean into customization or customer experience, and allowing them to really drive, again, as not just an individual, but as a business, the things only they can do. It's been incredible. I don't know if you want to share a little bit with that aerospace customer. I mean, that really has evolved from, I need a printer, to, I might need a process, to, can you help me develop a program? What does that look like?
Well, this particular customer has been a 7-year-long journey to go from one of the world's leading aerospace casting companies making an investment and acquiring an advanced materials company that they thought could enable production of cores for casting a single crystal turbine blades. Over the past 7 years, we have been alongside them as they've gone from testing to pilot to, hey, where you think these are actually pretty good parts, let's start running them through the entire casting process, and then working to drive yield up, drive costs down, reduce cycle times, reduce tack times, figuring out how are you going to scale this once you learn how to. It's one thing to make a few good parts, it's another thing to make hundreds of thousands of good parts. And having the open dialogue with them along the way to realize there were times in that 7-year period where the work to be done was heavily related to the things that we were capable of influencing, from software enablement, QA/QC tool systems, sometimes hardware adjustments. Our goal would be, this is just the first 7 years, and that 21 years from now we're still having this conversation. They're coming to us asking those questions rather than Googling, and then you find out about it in an email where they say, actually, you know what, we found someone else to help us. But that takes determined effort over a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, I get asked a lot, well, I've seen all the turmoil in additive. How should I future-proof my strategy? It's what you're saying. You future-proof your strategy by picking the right partner, not the right printer. Even if additive was perfect today, it would evolve. And so being able to understand, okay, well, is picking the right partner based on their equipment or their history in business or where they are? No, it's based on the value they see themselves bringing. And if that's problem solving, if that's resource management, if that's co-developing solutions, there is a lot more future proofing around that than I built a printer and I think I can cut the cost by 30%.
Right. Well, and when you think about risk management from an internal perspective, oftentimes you say, well, how would I produce this part with additive? What you really need is someone who will help you answer the question, how would I know if I should produce this part with additive? And you see a lot of companies that, well, we got this one really sharp engineer and she'll figure this out. What if she decides to move? What if she decides to go to work somewhere else? You're betting a lot on your ability to retain and engage this one person. What if she would like a promotion someday and doesn't want to work on this anymore? Having an external partner so oftentimes dampen the impact of people transitions in a company.
So we say a lot around here, we're no BS. We're all benign. And that's Midwestern heritage. You can call it whatever you want, but we're pretty straight shooters. What's one piece of advice you'd close with that you would say is just a no BS advice for someone at a general manager or SVP level?
It's pick somebody you would bet your butt on. That's the HR appropriate version of the phrase, because that's actually what you're doing. And most people, if you're in a senior executive role, you know this, and you choose your partners based on who you trust to deliver the outcome, as much as the resumes, the pedigree, whatever the case may be. We have a phrase that we like to use here that we call low ego, high delivery. And so if you want to have a conversation with somebody that'll tell you the good, bad, and the ugly, and come up with a plan to figure out whether your initiative can succeed and how it should succeed, those are the meetings we want to be in.
That's great. You can follow us on Apple or Spotify podcasts. And if you want to see our smiling faces, you can watch this episode on YouTube at the Additive Advantage Podcast. If you like this episode or feel bad for us, give us a 5-star review. You can do that on Apple or Spotify. It really helps the show grow. We also encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn so you know when new episodes are released.
Tell you what I'd like to encourage you to do. If you are an executive who has experience implementing additive projects, whether it was something that went well or didn't go well, but the factor was something that you don't hear anyone in the industry talking about, please reach out to us. Those are the stories we want to make sure get told on this show. And you can reach us at info@additiveadvantage.services.
Absolutely. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.